Possibly the most complicated and controversial cryptid to discuss, Sasquatches are extremely powerful creatures with heights ranging from 7-foot females to 9-foot males. Exhibiting sexual dimorphism, the females weigh between 400 to 600 pounds, while males could weigh in as much as 800 pounds, although some accounts attest to males reaching 10 foot tall and over 1,000 pounds. Even with conservative estimates, Sasquatch is more than likely able to lift at least 1,300 pounds, throw 500-pound objects through the air with ease. In fact, 50-pound basketball-sized rocks have been thrown by these creatures with one arm and a fair amount of accuracy. It is feasible that Sasquatch can use rocks as hunting weapons as necessary. Despite their massive size, these creatures are able to leap long distances, as well as run as fast as a horse, up to 45 miles an hour. Despite some origin stories linking them to the vegetarian Gigantopithecus, Sasquatches are considered to be omnivores, as witness accounts have mentioned stumbling across suspected Sasquatch kills, and there are history and lore-related myths connecting them to stealing human children and devouring them. Over the years, there has been thousands of reports of Sasquatch, and there are variations in these descriptions, which has further allowed us to create a series of types of these creatures. Some would call them hybrids, others would call them categorizations based on appearance. The Type 1 Sasquatch is the classic appearance of Sasquatch that most people are familiar with. It's like a cross between a human and a mountain gorilla. It has a large, powerful build, a thick, broad chest, black hair, and gray skin. Other hair colors that have been reported are brown, auburn, cinnamon, and occasionally white. Their height ranges from just under 7 feet to just over 9 feet, ranging in weight between 500 to 800 pounds. The Type 1 Sasquatch is commonly associated with mountainous regions or heavily forested areas in the Pacific Northwest. Frequenting the more southern areas of North America, the Type 2s have a more ape-like appearance than the Type 1s. The Type 2 Sasquatch has large eyes, allowing them to operate more capably at night. Their hair is reported to range from orange all the way to jet black. They are a bit smaller than the Type 1s, with an average height of around 7 feet. They tend to be very territorial and aggressive. Many encounters involve the killing of livestock and the leaving behind of a very human-like footprint. The Type 3 Sasquatch has a much more baboon-like appearance. In some cases, it's described as having a dog or bear-like face. The Type 3 can be extremely tall, ranging up to 15 feet in height. They have oversized heads and they look more monstrous than they do ape-like. They tend to live up in the mountains, but will come down from the mountains looking for food. The Type 3s may be the Sasquatch connected with the old legends of eating humans. Encounters with the Type 3 Sasquatch tend to be on the paranormal side, with characteristics being described such as glowing red eyes or being immune to bullets and firearms. The Type 4 Sasquatch is commonly associated with the northeastern section of America. They have been referred to as the early Bigfoot or the American Almas. They have a almost human-like appearance, more closely associated with the traits of an archaic or prehistoric man. They tend to be a little bit leaner and lighter than the Type 1s, but they are still very large and very strong. They have less facial hair than other types of Sasquatch. In some cases, even thinning hair or bald on top. Some eyewitnesses have reported long flowing beards and mustaches. There are 5 other cryptids considered to be close relatives or potential variants of the Sasquatch. The Ginosqua, or also known as the Rock Man from Native American folklore, the skunk ape, which frequents the Florida Everglades, the Almas from the Tian Shan Mountains in China, the orang pendek from Sumatra, and the Yeti from the Himalayas. For centuries, large ape sightings have been reported in North America. Indigenous peoples created a variety of names for these animals, as did early settlers and residents in many rural communities. Often referred to in the past as the hairy man or wild man, and often referred to in the modern vernacular as Sasquatch or Bigfoot. The North American Wood Ape Conservancy refers to them as wood apes. The word Sasquatch itself is believed to be an Anglicization of the Native American word for wild man or hairy man. J.W. Burns, a Canadian Indian agent assigned to a First Nations tribe, coined the term Sasquatch in the 1930s. The majority of scientists have historically discounted the existence of a relict North American ape population, considering it to be a combination of folklore, misidentification, and a hoax, rather than living animals. Despite the skeptics' and scientists' assertions that there is no such thing as Sasquatch, results from a 2014 Associated Press poll showed more Americans believe in Bigfoot than the Big Bang Theory. There's a legend regarding what is commonly referred to as the Bigfoot Wars. The Bigfoot Wars began when a Native American child was kidnapped and eaten by a Sasquatch. This horrific event led to a war between Native American warriors and the Sasquatch tribes. Ancient artwork, cave drawings, and oral traditions recount the details of battles waged between Native American tribes and Sasquatches. To this day, there are certain wilderness areas, landmarks, and sacred grounds connected to this ancient lore that Native Americans warned travelers not to venture into for fear of being attacked by Sasquatches. Currently, in the present day, there are three basic beliefs in the origins of Sasquatch, including many variations and fringe theories. The first belief is the common connection to the Native American origins that Sasquatch is not merely a wild or hairy man, but a supernatural, mystical creature that can move between the physical and spiritual realms. The second origin story is based more on scientific theory that Sasquatch may be a relict hominoid with the ancestral connection to either Gigantopithecus or even a much older Paranthropus relative. A more fringe, third theoretical origin is the story that Sasquatch represents some form of alien hybrid experiment, which helps explain some of the accounts where UFO activity happens prior to a Sasquatch encounter. There's numerous other theories as to the origins of the Sasquatch creatures. However, only the theory of a relict primate population is championed by a small contingent of respected scientists. The relict primate theory has the benefit of helping explain the Native American belief that these creatures have existed for thousands of years, because the scientific idea of them migrating across the Bering Sea during the last glacial maximum when the seas were lower and a continent or subcontinent known as Beringia was exposed, connecting Russia and present-day Alaska. This bridge would have allowed potentially for the migration of Gigantopithecus or Paranthropus many hundreds of thousands of years ago. And with this migration would come the possibility of Native Americans encountering these creatures and developing this mythological lore that's connected to Sasquatches today. The scientists that initially pushed this Gigantopithecus theory were Grover Krantz and Jeffrey Bourne. They believed that Bigfoot was potentially a relict population of Gigantopithecus. Now, all Gigantopithecus fossils were found in Asia, but according to Bourne, many species of animals migrated across the Bering Land Bridge, and he suggested that Gigantopithecus might have done this as well, as I previously mentioned. The gorilla-like Paranthropus was extinct around 800,000 years ago, but primatologist John R. Napier and anthropologist Gordon Strassenberg have suggested a species of Paranthropus as a possible candidate for Bigfoot's identity. The question is, did any primates make it out of Asia? Sasquatches are found primarily in isolated mountain ranges or dense forested regions, although there have been reports of similar creatures around the world in various habitats ranging from swamps to deserts. Many of these creatures frequent difficult terrain such as mountain ridges, forests with thick underbrush, and challenging weather conditions related to the regions such as extreme cold, dense fogs, heavy rains, and flood-prone river valleys. As far as actual lairs or refuges, researchers have suggested Sasquatches use various tree limbs and unusual bending techniques to make a nest-like burrow or bedding. Others have suggested that they are cave-dwelling and may use hidden volcanic tubes which lace the Pacific Northwest mountain ranges. The remote nature of the Sasquatch preferred habitat and their ability to navigate the territory far better than any other creature on Earth has led to encounters ranging from being stalked to being hopelessly outmaneuvered and unable to close ground, allowing any kind of direct observation. It's been said many times that you don't find Sasquatch, Sasquatch finds you. There has been no research institution that has ever conducted an extensive field survey in a relevant part of the Pacific Northwest, and no grants have ever been made available to individual enthusiasts wanting to research a North American primate. In fact, expressing a serious interest in this subject was likely to put one's academic career at risk. Although a blurry 5-second video of a bird was hailed by Science magazine as proof of the existence of the ivory-billed woodpecker, and presumed sonar images of Nessie made it into Nature magazine, no evidence in support of the existence of another primate species in North America has ever been accepted by any of the mainstream scientific journals. John Albert Bindernagel, a PhD in biology, stated, "The Bigfoot phenomenon should receive more attention from serious scientists, but the evidence doesn't get scrutinized objectively. We can't bring the evidence to our colleagues because it's perceived as taboo." John Russell Napier was one of the most notable scientists to give serious attention to Bigfoot and Sasquatch phenomenon. His investigations including interviewing amateur investigators and purported eyewitnesses, visiting alleged Bigfoot sighting areas, studying scant physical evidence, and screening the 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film. Napier concluded that the scientific evidence taken collectively points to a hoax of some kind, yet there is nothing in the Patterson-Gimlin film which would prove conclusively that this was a hoax. He further stated that there is not enough hard proof to confirm that Bigfoot is a real creature. However, the indirect evidence, especially footprints, are compelling and intriguing enough to avoid dismissing the subject entirely unworthy of serious study. Esteban Sarmiento of the American Museum of Natural History has a PhD in biological anthropology. He is one of the few mainstream experts to give serious attention to cryptozoology, particularly the reports of Bigfoot. Sarmiento does not suggest that the existence of Bigfoot has been established, but that its existence is possible, and that claims and evidence deserve more careful scrutiny. A more vocal proponent of the Bigfoot theory is Dr. Henner Fahrenbach with a PhD in zoology. He has stated that I do not speculate about the possibility of Bigfoot's existence. In fact, I am convinced that Sasquatch is not only real, but borderline supernatural, a monster straight out of Greek mythology. Of all of the members of academia that have given a nod to the Sasquatch theory, there are two in particular that stand out. The first being Grover S. Krantz, who has a PhD in anthropology. Grover Sanders Krantz was an American anthropologist and cryptozoologist. He was one of the few scientists not only to research Bigfoot, but also to express his beliefs in the animal's existence. Throughout his professional career, Krantz authored more than 60 academic articles and 10 books on human evolution, and conducted field research in Europe, China, and Java. When speaking on the idea of Sasquatch as a hoax, Grover responded, "The fakery must have been designed by a brilliant human anatomist at least 40 years ago, and one who has ever since been directing a large group of people, placing thousands of these tracks under remarkable circumstances, and this all done without being seen or having a member expose this colossal hoax. The way I like to put it is, Sasquatch is ridiculous, but the alternative of a massive hoax is impossible. Therefore, the ridiculous must be true." Grover Krantz would be subjected to personal ramifications, professional sacrifices, and general disdain over his Sasquatch research. A former student and respected anthropologist, Dr. Gary Bershini, is said to have quoted, "Science works on evidence, hypothesis, and theory." But the commonly held idea during Krantz's time as a professor was that Bigfoot was impossible. Few academics would even consider the evidence. That's not a very scientific approach, but that's unfortunately what some folks felt. Donald Tyler, PhD in anthropology and sociology at Idaho State, was a fellow researcher and professor to Grover Krantz. His quote is, "The basic reason why some of the faculty didn't support him for full professor was not so much because of Bigfoot, but because he stayed with it when the evidence never got any better." Tyler said it was also common knowledge that Krantz fell prey to hoaxes. Dr. Tyler himself was able to deceive Krantz. After graduating, he and another professor made a fake Sasquatch cast and took it to Krantz for analysis. To make the cast, they made an imprint in the ground, filled it with plaster, and used their fingernails and foreheads to create lines in the bottom of the cast. Upon examining it, Krantz determined based on specific dermal ridges and the lines in the foot that the cast was without a doubt from a Sasquatch in the Blue Mountains. "Before it became unbearable," Tyler said, "I told him that we made the track. He didn't get angry or anything, but what I was trying to do was show him how things can be faked and how some of the people he trusted were indeed faking it." Despite inconsistencies in Grover Krantz's abilities to discern hoaxes, he was indeed an expert in his field, and there were many times when the evidence he provided was difficult to disprove. And this may have been, more than anything else, one of the deciding factors why people didn't accept him as a serious professor, and indeed he never did gain his full professor status, which seems to be a shame in hindsight. By far, one of the most respected researchers of Sasquatch is Don Jeffrey Meldrum, a professor of anatomy and anthropology with a PhD in anatomical sciences. He is an expert in biological anthropology. He is quoted as saying, "It is one matter to address the theoretical possibility of a relict species of hominid in North America. There must be essential evidence to lend weight to this hypothesis to counter the critics' various aspersions." In response to Dr. Meldrum's insistence that the scientific community needs to take things more serious when it comes to the idea behind a relict primate such as Sasquatch, the skeptics usually have some form of anecdotal reply. One example of this type of response is from Michael Shermer, a known skeptic, saying quite simply, "The science starts once you have a body." In fact, this is a common rallying cry for skeptics and scientists alike to contradict the idea that Sasquatch deserves a more serious investigation. And Dr. Meldrum's response to these types of anecdotal replies is on the contrary. Most serious investigators would contend that the science starts once you have a question, followed by observation, and the accumulation of data. Dr. Meldrum suggests that the idea of having a body before research can commence is a distraction, and the idea that they offhandedly dismiss all of the evidence as a result or demand conclusive proof up front is hardly the method or process of explorative science. Regardless of whether you believe or disbelieve in Dr. Jeff Meldrum's theories, he has earned the respect of very capable skeptics, people that have a lot of doubt in the whole idea behind Sasquatch. Brian Dunning, for example, from the Skeptic podcast, says the work of responsible scientists like Dr. Meldrum is exactly what true skeptics should be asking the Bigfoot community for, not criticizing him for it. To summarize the research endeavors from both sides of the fence, you have to understand that there are very few cryptids that have brought so many respected researchers and capable skeptics to the discussion table. As a matter of fact, the idea behind a North American primate has generated changes in the way that we research cryptids in general. The initial Sasquatch encounters occurred deeper in the woods and involved Native Americans, mountain men, lumberjacks, forest rangers, explorers, and similar wilderness-related experiences or individuals. Over the last 50 years, encounters have become more prevalent closer to civilization. Rather than discuss dozens or potentially hundreds of documented encounters with Sasquatch, we will look at only one in particular. It has been suggested by skeptics and certain believers that the only way to solve the debate over whether Sasquatch exists or not is to simply shoot and kill one and bring the body in for research and investigation. Roger Patterson himself on his deathbed suggested he should have shot Patty, and anthropologist Grover S. Krantz used to roam the backwoods in his truck with a shotgun. While anthropologist Jeff Meldrum disagrees with this approach, many Sasquatch believers and hardened skeptics suggest only a body, dead or alive, will prove Sasquatch's existence. This witness account deals with the sensitive nature of bringing in Sasquatch, dead or alive.
On the southern edge of the Pacific Northwest, near the Sierra Mountains in Northern California, 27-year-old Justin Smeha lives with his wife and daughter.
About the only thing I do in my free time is hunting and fishing. Since I was raised, that's all we ever did. Every weekend, it's assumed that we're going hunting or fishing year-round. When it came to Bigfoot or Sasquatch growing up, I just never heard anybody talk about it like it's a real thing. I really knew nothing about it.
On October 8th, 2010, all that changed.
It was 65 degrees up there, relatively nice for the Sierras at about 7,000 feet. Me and a buddy were out bear hunting. There was about an hour and a half left of sunlight. We came into the clearing where the meadow is, and both of us kind of looked over. We saw movement.
Stop, stop, stop!
And I saw this creature standing there about 80 yards away. It was 600 pounds and like 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall. Really big shoulders, very muscular looking. The only thing that I ever said in my head was, this is a monster. This is something that shouldn't be here. This is a nightmare. This is different. This is unreal. It was approaching us slowly. It took maybe 2 or 3 steps. At that point, I had already actually chambered my rifle. My buddy's starting to panic.
Dude, don't shoot! Don't shoot!
Yeah, and at that point, I was looking at it and I was thinking, this is not supposed to be here. This thing needs to die.
Because of some very meticulous copyright keyframing segments, this 1 minute section has to be narrated manually. So what occurs is he shoots the Sasquatch in the shoulder, it goes down, and that's when he notices movement to the right of two juvenile Sasquatches. Now they probably were startled when their mother or father was shot. It apparently tries to escape, stumbling on 2 feet, sometimes on all fours, into the bushes. It's at this point that he states he wasn't sure if the juveniles might attack, but regardless of such, he pursued them into the bushes. They split down 2 separate sections. Approximately 15 minutes later, Josh stumbles across the juvenile in a clearing. This is one of the most controversial witness accounts that Monsters and Mysteries ever recorded, and in fact, people are on 2 sides of the discussion. One side is upset that there was a Sasquatch that was shot in the first place, and then there are skeptics that are upset that if he indeed did shoot a Sasquatch, that he failed to collect the body, so it was all for nothing and it was a waste.
Adrenaline, my heart was pumping 1,000,000 miles an hour. I decided that I was going to shoot one because if I didn't shoot this thing, nobody would ever believe that this happened. I put the scope on it. I shot it right in the middle of the neck. I picked up the little one. It was starting to choke to death. It was just in the last moments of its life. When I got close to it, it seemed to have a lot of really human features. The hair was really thin, and it had white in its eyes, and it was just sitting there looking at me. And I was sitting there holding it, looking at it, and I was like, I messed up. I messed up. It probably only took maybe 10 seconds for it to choke to death. Right about that time, then my buddy comes up the hill, and he was kind of thinking the same thing I was, that this was just too human. This was, what we did was wrong. I felt so ashamed.
Fearing the game warden was heading their way, they panicked and decided to bury the creature.
I went to the thickest brush I could find and started just put it in and started grabbing stuff, throwing it on top of it, whatever we could find, stumps, trees, brush, rocks. On the 2.5-hour drive home, never said a word to each other. It was really just nothing but shame. It was just, I knew that I had messed up. I felt an extreme amount of guilt. They didn't mean us any harm. At one point, it just hit me that I realized that I had shot not 1, but 2 Bigfoots, and it was life-changing.
Bigfoot hunters Derek Randalls and Justin Smeha recently submitted samples of an unidentified creature to a DNA lab. In November 2012, preliminary findings were announced, alleging that Bigfoot is a genetic relative of humans. The researchers claim that some 15,000 years ago, a hybrid species developed from males of an unknown primate, crossing with archaic human females. The result was the line of hairy humanoids we call Bigfoot. Derek and Justin will have to wait for the study to be proved conclusively.
In 2014, the National Center for Biotechnology Information, in conjunction with the U.S. National Library of Medicine with assistance from the National Institutes of Health, conducted a very thorough genetic analysis of the top 30 most compelling hair samples taken from Sasquatch, Yeti, and other hairy hominid encounters. Among the 30 samples are the tissue samples collected by Justin Smeha that were submitted on his behalf by Derek Randalls. At the end of this analysis report, you'll see the acknowledgement of all of those who had collected samples. The controversy surrounding Sasquatch, Bigfoot, and the North American ape could make it the most important cryptid subject of all time. The debate over Sasquatch in general has brought some of the most capable skeptics and the most credible researchers to the table. Whenever you have such passionate differences of opinion, both sides are forced to rise to the occasion. Sasquatch researchers were once just believers aimlessly roaming the woods and blindly asserting their belief in some undiscovered relict giant primate or supernatural beast. Over the years, the demands for concrete evidence have forced a more scientific approach. Some of the Sasquatch researchers go so far as to vehemently call out hoaxes, frauds, and scams within their own community. Some factions of the more open-minded skeptics have found a level of respect for the more professional and credible scientists of academia that have put their professional reputations on the line. If we ignore the chaos of the fringe elements and keep focused on what evidence is expected and respected, you can see the entire field of cryptozoology, and perhaps zoology in general, has gained a more methodical and determined base of amateur hobbyists turned passionate researchers. Ultimately, in the end, you have two different sides learning from each other despite flatly disagreeing in most cases. Who knows, at some point a true scientific method or the advancement in field research may arise that can benefit science in general, and all of this from something most people believe doesn't exist.